Ladies and gentlemen, if you are enjoying my videos, please click the like button. It is the only way the YouTube algorithm really notices me. I would be very grateful to you. The Mimic Echo of Evil. Scary story published by Scare Fiction. Chapter 1. The Haunted House. A young woman in her late 20s, Sarah had, with a determined spirit and an adventurous heart, recently made the decision to start fresh in a new city, hoping to leave behind the memories of a troubled past and embrace the promise of a brighter future. With her curly brown hair tied back in a ponytail and her hazel eyes filled with determination, Sarah stepped off the bus and onto the quiet suburban street that would soon become her new home. The moment Sarah laid eyes on the charming two-story house with its white picket fence and neatly trimmed lawn, she felt a flutter of excitement mixed with apprehension in her chest. It was the epitome of suburban bliss, but as she approached the front door, a strange panic arose in his body, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. Despite the lingering unease, Sarah unlocked the door and stepped inside, her heart pounding in her chest. The house greeted her with a heavy silence, broken only by the soft creak of the floorboards beneath her feet. Ignoring the nagging sense of foreboding, Sarah set about unpacking her belongings, determined to make this house feel like home. As she arranged her books on the shelves and hung her paintings on the walls, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. It was as if unseen eyes were following her every move, casting a shadow over the once welcoming atmosphere of her new home. The days passed in a blur as Sarah settled into a routine. Each morning, she would wake up early and brew herself a strong cup of coffee, savoring the bitter warmth as she watched the sunrise from her kitchen window. Then she would lace up her running shoes and head out for a jog, weaving through the quiet streets of the neighborhood, the rhythmic pounding of her footsteps a welcome distraction from the sense of unease that seemed to follow her wherever she went. Returning home from her run, Sarah would spend the rest of the day working on her freelance writing projects, her mind constantly wandering back to the strange occurrences that seemed to plague her new home. No matter how hard she tried to focus, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something lurking in the shadows, just out of sight. Each night, as darkness fell and the house grew quiet, Sarah would curl up on the couch with a book, seeking solace in the familiar worlds of mystery and intrigue. But no matter how engrossed she became in the pages, she couldn't escape the feeling that she was not alone, that there was something lurking in the darkness, waiting to reveal itself. And so, as Sarah lay awake in bed, listening to the whispers of the night, she couldn't help but wonder what secrets lay hidden within the walls of her new home. Little did she know that the answers she sought would soon reveal themselves in ways she could never have imagined. Chapter 2. Unsettling Discoveries. The discovery of old newspaper clippings in the attic, a shiver down Sarah's body, confirming her growing suspicions that there was more to her new home than met the eye. As she unfolded the yellowed pages, her eyes scanned the faded headlines, revealing the tragic tale of a family that had once lived in the house years ago. According to the articles, the family had been well known in the community, respected and admired by all who knew them. But one fateful night, they had vanished without a trace, leaving behind nothing but unanswered questions and a trail of speculation. Some claimed they had simply packed up and left town, while others whispered of foul play and dark secrets hidden within the walls of the house. As Sarah read on, her heart sank with each new revelation. The family had been a happy, loving unit, but beneath the surface, there had been whispers of discord and tension, hints of a darkness lurking just out of sight. And then, one night, they had vanished without a trace, leaving behind nothing but memories and unanswered questions. The clippings painted a grim picture of the house's past, but it was the local rumors that, according to the whispers that echoed through the neighborhood, there was a malevolent prime weapon house in it, and refused to let go of its hold on the world. At first, Sarah dismissed the rumors as the idle gossip of superstitious neighbors, but the more she thought about it, the more the pieces began to fall into place. The strange occurrences that had plagued her since she moved in, the feeling of being watched, the inexplicable drafts and flickering lights, it all seemed to point to something lurking in the shadows, something dark and sinister that defied rational explanation. With a sense of trepidation, Sarah set out to learn more about the history of the house and the family that had once called it home. She visited the local library, poring over old records and dusty archives in search of answers. But the more she searched, the more elusive the truth became, until it felt as though she were chasing ghosts in the dark. As the sun set on another day, Sarah returned home, her mind buzzing with unanswered questions and a growing sense of unease. The house loomed before her, silent and still, but beneath its tranquil exterior, Sarah knew that something sinister lurked, waiting to reveal itself in ways she could never have imagined. And as she stepped through the front door, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to uncover secrets that were better left buried. Chapter 3. Mimicking Voices. The silence of the house enveloped Sarah like a heavy blanket as she stood alone in the dimly lit living room. The ticking of the old grandfather clock echoed through the empty space, the only sound breaking the stillness of the night. But as Sarah turned to leave, a soft whisper drifted through the air, so faint that she could barely make out the words. "Sarah," it called, a gentle murmur. Sarah was very scared. She froze in place, her heart pounding in her chest as she scanned the room for any sign of intruders. But the house remained empty, bathed in the soft glow of the moonlight streaming through the windows. "Sarah," the voice called again, more insistent this time, as though beckoning her closer. With trembling hands, Sarah crept forward, her senses on high alert as she searched for the source of the mysterious voice. But try as she might, she could find nothing, no trace of the unseen presence that seemed to be watching her every move. As the days passed, this voice grew more frequent, more persistent, until it felt as though Sarah were being haunted by the echoes of her own thoughts. She would hear her name whispered in the darkness, a soft sigh that seemed to follow her wherever she went. At first, she dismissed it as her imagination running wild, a trick of the mind brought on by the stress of her new surroundings. But then, one night, as Sarah lay awake in bed, she heard the voice again, clearer this time, as though it were right beside her. "Sarah," it whispered, and this time there was no mistaking the urgency in its tone. With a gasp, Sarah sat bolt upright, her heart pounding in her chest as she scanned the room for any sign of the unseen presence. But the room was empty, bathed in the soft glow of the moonlight filtering through the curtains. Sarah shook her head, trying to shake off the feeling of unease that gripped her. But the voice lingered in her mind, a haunting reminder of the darkness that lurked within the walls of her new home. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah's suspicions grew, until she could no longer deny the truth staring her in the face. Something was mimicking the voices of her loved ones, something that seemed to know her deepest fears and darkest secrets. But try as she might, she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was not of this world, that it was something far more sinister than she could ever have imagined. With a sense of dread gnawing at her insides, Sarah resolved to uncover the truth behind the voices that haunted her, no matter the cost. But little did she know that the answers she sought would lead her down a path darker and more twisted than she could ever have imagined. And as she delved deeper into the mysteries of the house, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was playing a dangerous game with forces beyond her control. Chapter 4. The Shadow in the Mirror. The flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows across the room as I stood before the ornate mirror in the hallway, trying to ignore the creeping sense of unease that had settled over me like a heavy shroud. It had started innocently enough, just a fleeting glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye, but now it seemed as though every reflection held the promise of something sinister lurking just beyond the glass. I forced myself to meet my own gaze in the mirror, trying to push aside the irrational fear that threatened to consume me. But as I stared into my own eyes, a fear down my body, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. It was as if someone or something was watching me from the other side of the glass, hidden in the darkness, just out of reach. With trembling hands, I reached out to touch the mirror's surface, half expecting it to ripple like water beneath my fingertips. But it remained solid and unyielding, reflecting back the image of a woman on the brink of madness. I tore my gaze away from the mirror, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. But no matter where I turned, I couldn't escape the sense that something was lurking just out of sight, waiting to reveal itself in the most terrifying of ways. Night after night, the shadows seemed to grow longer, the whispers of the darkness growing louder with each passing moment. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination running wild, that there was a rational explanation for everything that was happening. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. And then, one night, as I stood before the mirror once more, I saw it. A shadowy figure lurking just beyond the glass, its form shifting and twisting in the dim candlelight. I blinked, convinced that it was just a trick of the light. But when I looked back, the figure was gone, leaving me questioning my sanity. I stumbled back from the mirror, my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to make sense of what I had seen. Was it just a figment of my imagination, or was there truly something lurking within the shadows, waiting to drag me down into the depths of madness? As I stood there, trembling and alone in the darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. And as the whispers of the night grew louder, I realized that the shadowy figure in the mirror was just the beginning of the horrors that awaited me within the walls of my new home. Chapter 5. Confronting the Past. The weight of impending dread hung heavy in the air as Sarah delved deeper into the history of her new home, determined to uncover the dark secrets that lurked within its walls. Armed with determination and a sense of unease gnawing at her insides, she scoured through old records and dusty archives, piecing together fragments of the past in search of answers. The local library became her sanctuary, its musty shelves holding the key to unlocking the mysteries that surrounded her. Sarah spent hours poring over ancient documents and yellowed newspaper clippings, her fingers trembling as she traced the faded ink, each word a clue in the puzzle of her new reality. And slowly, painstakingly, the pieces began to fall into place. The house had a long and storied history, stretching back decades to a time when it had been the pride and joy of a wealthy family. But beneath its elegant facade lay a tangled web of secrets and lies, a darkness that had been buried deep within its foundations. As Sarah read on, her heart clenched with each new revelation. There had been whispers of tragedy and loss, of a family torn apart by greed and betrayal. And then, one fateful night, it had all come crashing down, leaving behind nothing but shattered dreams and broken lives. But it was the final piece of the puzzle that a fear shivering Sarah's body, filling her with a sense of dread unlike anything she had ever known. Buried deep within the archives, she uncovered the truth about the malevolent presence that haunted the house, a restless spirit trapped between worlds, consumed by rage and despair. It was a tale of betrayal and revenge, of a soul bound to the earth by unfinished business and unquenchable thirst for vengeance. And as Sarah stared at the words on the page, her mind reeled with the realization that the darkness that lurked within the shadows was not just a figment of her imagination, but a very real and very dangerous presence. With trembling hands, Sarah closed the book, her mind racing with fear and uncertainty. She knew now that she was not alone in this house, that there was something lurking in the darkness, waiting to strike when she least expected it. But armed with the knowledge of the past, she was determined to confront the malevolent presence head-on, to put an end to the horrors that haunted her new home once and for all. As she stepped out into the fading light of day, Sarah steeled herself for the battle that lay ahead, her resolve as unyielding as the darkness that threatened to consume her. Little did she know that the true horrors of the past were yet to be revealed, and that the darkest secrets of the house would soon come to light in ways she could never have imagined. Chapter 6. The Ominous Warning. The day started like any other four. Sour sun, rising timidly over the horizon, casting a warm glow across the quiet neighborhood. But as she stepped out onto her porch, a sense of foreboding settled over her like a heavy shroud, warning her of the dangers that lurked just beyond her doorstep. It was then that she saw him, a mysterious figure standing across the street, watching her with dark, piercing eyes that seemed to bore into her very soul. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she took in the sight of the stranger, his presence sending a shiver down her soul. Without a word, the man had approached, his footsteps echoing ominously against the pavement. His face was lined with age and wisdom, his eyes filled with a knowing sadness which scared Sarah a lot. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low and gravelly, carrying with it a weight of centuries-old wisdom. "This house is cursed, haunted by forces beyond your comprehension. Leave now, before it's too late." Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she listened to the man's words, his warning ringing in her ears like a funeral toll. But despite the fear gnawing at her insides, she refused to heed his advice, her determination to uncover the truth behind the haunting outweighing her instinct for self-preservation. "I appreciate your concern," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But I can't just abandon this house. There are answers here, secrets that need to be brought to light." The man's eyes darkened with a mixture of pity and resignation, as if he knew that nothing he could say would sway her from her course. With a heavy sigh, he nodded, his gaze lingering on Sarah's face for a moment longer before he turned and disappeared into the shadows. As Sarah watched him go, a sense of unease settled over her like a thick fog, obscuring her vision and clouding her judgment. She knew that she was playing a dangerous game, that the forces she was meddling with were beyond her control. But she couldn't turn back now, not when she was so close to uncovering the truth. With a heavy heart, Sarah returned to the house, her mind buzzing with questions and doubts. But no matter how hard she tried to shake the feeling of impending doom, it clung to her like a second skin, a constant reminder of the dangers that lurked just beyond her reach. And as the shadows lengthened, And the day gave way to night. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that unseen eyes were following her every move, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Little did she know that the true horrors of the house were yet to be revealed, and that the darkest secrets of the past would soon come to light in ways she could never have imagined. Chapter 7. Paranormal Investigations. The decision to enlist the help of a paranormal investigator weighed heavily on Sarah's mind as she watched the sun dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the empty rooms of her house. She knew that she was playing with fire, dabbling in forces beyond her comprehension, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was running out of options. With a sense of trepidation, Sarah reached out to a local paranormal investigator, a woman by the name of Dr. Emily Hartley. Dr. Hartley had made a name for herself in the field of paranormal research. Her keen intellect and unwavering determination earning her the respect of skeptics and believers alike. As Sarah sat across from Dr. Hartley in her dimly lit office, she felt a sense of relief wash over her, knowing that she was not alone in her struggle. Dr. Hartley listened intently as Sarah recounted her experiences in the house, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and uncertainty. "I believe that there is something dark and malevolent haunting the house," Sarah said, her words echoing in the silence of the room. "I've heard voices calling my name, seen shadowy figures lurking in the corners. I need your help to uncover the truth." Dr. Hartley studied Sarah for a moment, her eyes narrowing with a mixture of concern and determination. "I'll do everything in my power to help you," she said, her voice firm with resolve. "But you need to understand that the forces we're dealing with are beyond our control. Are you prepared for what we might uncover?" Sarah nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that she was playing a dangerous game, that the path she had chosen was fraught with peril. But she couldn't turn back now, not when she was so close to uncovering the truth. Together, Sarah and Dr. Hartley returned to the house, armed with an array of scientific instruments and a sense of determination that bordered on recklessness. They spent hours exploring every nook and cranny, searching for any sign of paranormal activity. And then, as the clock struck midnight, they gathered in the dimly lit living room, the air thick with anticipation. Dr. Hartley lit a solitary of candles, their flickering flames casting eerie shadows on the walls, and began to chant in a language Sarah couldn't understand. At first, nothing happened, and Sarah felt a surge of disappointment wash over her. But then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, the temperature in the room began to drop, and a sense of unease settled over them like a heavy blanket. And then, suddenly, with a sound like rushing wind, the room was filled with an otherworldly presence, a feeling of cold dread that seemed to seep into Sarah's very bones. She closed her eyes hammering in her chest, as Dr. Hartley called out into darkness, her voice trembling with fear. And then, to Sarah's shock and horror, a voice answered back, a soft, ethereal whisper that shook her soul. It was the voice of a young girl, sweet and innocent, but tinged with a sadness that cut Sarah to the core. "My name is Emily," the voice said, its words echoing in the silence of the room. "I died here, trapped between worlds, consumed by rage and despair. Beware the darkness that lurks within these walls, for it seeks to consume all who dare to trespass on its domain." With a gasp, Sarah opened her eyes, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew now that she was in far over her head, that the true horrors of the house were beyond anything she could have imagined. And as she gazed into the darkness, she couldn't shake the feeling that the battle for her soul had only just begun. Chapter 8: Escalating Malevolence. The once quiet house now crackled with an eerie energy, thick with a sense of impending doom that hung heavy in the air. Sarah's nerves were stretched, taut like a violin string, her every sense on high alert as she navigated the increasingly hostile environment of her own home. It started with small things, objects shifting inexplicably in the dead of night, doors slamming shut with a force that sent shockwaves reverberating through the house. At first, Sarah tried to rationalize away the disturbances, attributing them to the creaks and groans of an old house settling into its surroundings. But as the incidents grew more frequent and more violent, she could no longer deny the truth that stared her in the face. There was something malevolent lurking within these walls, something that thrived on fear and chaos, and it was growing stronger with each passing day. Sarah's sleep became fractured and restless, haunted by nightmares that left her waking in a cold sweat, her heart pounding in her chest. She would lie in bed, listening to the sounds of the house as it seemed to come alive with a cacophony of whispers and groans, each one a taunting reminder of the darkness that lurked just beyond her reach. And then, one night, as Sarah lay awake in bed, a bone-chilling cold swept through the room, sending a shiver down her body. She pulled the covers tight around her, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she watched in horror as her breath misted in the frigid air. With a sinking feeling in the pit of her stomach, Sarah realized that the temperature was dropping unnaturally, plummeting to levels that were impossible for this time of year. She reached for her phone, fingers trembling as she dialed the number of the paranormal investigator she had enlisted to help her uncover the truth behind the haunting. The investigator arrived soon after, his face drawn and pale as he surveyed the scene before him. He wasted no time in setting up his equipment, his hands moving with a sense of urgency as he prepared to confront the malevolent entity that lurked within the house. Together, they ventured into the darkest corners of the house, their footsteps echoing eerily against the floorboards as they searched for signs of the entity's presence. And it wasn't long before they found it, a swirling vortex of darkness that seemed to pulse with a sinister energy, its very presence suffocating in its intensity. As they watched in horror, the entity lashed out with a sudden burst of violence, sending objects flying through the air with a force that seemed to defy gravity. Sarah ducked for cover, her heart pounding in her chest as she watched in horror as the walls of her home seemed to close in around her, trapping her in a nightmare from which she could not escape. And as the chaos raged around her, Sarah realized with a sinking feeling that the true horrors of the house were yet to be revealed, and that the darkness that lurked within its walls was far more malevolent than she could have ever imagined. Chapter 9: Race Against Time. Time was running out. Sarah could feel it, like a weight pressing down on her chest, squeezing the air from her lungs with each passing moment. The malevolent entity that haunted her home grew stronger with each passing day, its icy grip tightening around her like a vice, threatening to consume her soul. With a sense of urgency burning in her veins, Sarah embarked on a frantic race against time, determined to uncover the key to stopping the entity before it was too late. She combed through old journals and dusty tomes, searching for clues that might shed light on the darkness that plagued her home. But the answers remained elusive, hidden within the labyrinthine passages of the house, waiting to be discovered by those brave enough to seek them out. Sarah spent hours poring over the faded pages, her fingers tracing the ink-stained lines as she followed the trail of breadcrumbs that led her deeper into the heart of the mystery. And then, just when she was on the verge of giving up hope, Sarah stumbled upon a hidden passage concealed behind a crumbling wall in the basement. With a sense of trepidation, she stepped into the darkness, her heart hammering in her chest as she ventured into the unknown. The passage twisted and turned like a serpent, leading Sarah deeper into the bowels of the house, until she emerged into a hidden chamber bathed in an eerie half-light. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the walls were lined with shelves upon shelves of ancient artifacts and arcane symbols. With trembling hands, Sarah began to sift through the artifacts, searching for anything that might hold the key to stopping the malevolent entity that lurked within the shadows. And then, at last, she found it, a small, leather-bound book, hidden beneath a pile of dusty tomes, its pages filled with cryptic messages and arcane symbols. As she flipped through the pages, Sarah's heart skipped a beat, her breath catching in her throat as she realized the true nature of the darkness that had haunted her home. The entity was not just a restless spirit seeking revenge. It was a creature of pure malevolence, a force of darkness that had been summoned from the depths of the underworld to wreak havoc upon the living. With newfound determination, Sarah set out to confront the entity head-on, armed with the knowledge she had gleaned from the ancient tome. But as she ventured deeper into the heart of the house, she couldn't shake the feeling that the true horrors of the past were yet to be revealed. Chapter 10. Final Confrontation. The air crackled with tension as Sarah stood before the malevolent entity, her heart pounding in her chest as she prepared to confront the darkness that had plagued her home for far too long. Armed with the knowledge she had gathered about its origins, she steeled herself for the battle that lay ahead, determined to banish the evil from the house once and for all. The entity loomed before her, a swirling vortex of darkness that seemed to pulse with a sinister energy, its very presence suffocating in its intensity. But Sarah refused to back down, her resolve as unyielding as the steel blade she clenched in her trembling hand. With a primal scream, she lunged forward, her blade slicing through the darkness with a satisfying hiss. But the entity was quick to retaliate, lashing out with tendrils of shadow that snaked through the air like vipers, seeking to ensnare her in their grasp. Sarah fought with all her might, her every muscle straining against the weight of the darkness that threatened to overwhelm her. She dodged and weaved through the onslaught, her senses heightened to a razor's edge as she searched for an opening in the entity's defenses. And then, at last, she saw it, a flicker of weakness in the entity's form, a momentary lapse in its guard that offered her the opportunity she had been waiting for. With a roar of triumph, she plunged her blade into the heart of the darkness, her every strike fueled by a fierce determination to protect those she loved. But even as she fought, Sarah knew that victory was far from assured. The entity was relentless in its assault, its fury unchecked by the blows she rained down upon it. And with each passing moment, she could feel her strength waning, her energy draining away like water through a sieve. Desperate to turn the tide of battle, Sarah reached deep within herself, drawing upon reserves of courage and determination she never knew she possessed. With a primal roar, she unleashed a torrent of power that sent the entity reeling, its form writhing in agony as it struggled to maintain its hold on the material world. And then, with a final, desperate lunge, Sarah delivered the killing blow, her blade striking true and piercing the heart of the darkness with a burning light. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, suspended in a moment of perfect stillness. And then, with a deafening roar, the darkness was banished. Sarah stood victorious, her chest heaving with exertion as she surveyed the wreckage of the battle that had raged within her home. But even as she basked in the glow of her hard-won victory, Sarah knew that the darkness that had haunted her home for so long was not truly defeated. For evil was a force as old as time itself, and though she had banished it from her home for now, she knew that it would always linger on the edges of her consciousness, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. Chapter 11. Aftermath. With the malevolent entity vanquished and the house finally free from its dark grip, Sarah stood in the silence that followed, her heart heavy with the weight of the ordeal she had endured. The once chaotic atmosphere of the house had given way to an eerie stillness, broken only by the sound of her own ragged breaths. As she surveyed the wreckage of the battle that had raged within her home, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of disbelief wash over her. It was over the nightmare that had haunted her for so long had finally come to an end. But even as relief flooded through her, she knew that the scars left behind by the darkness would linger long after the physical remnants had faded away. With a weary sigh, Sarah sank to her knees, her fingers tracing the patterns of dust that coated the floor. The house felt different, now empty, devoid of the malevolent presence that had once lurked within its walls. But beneath the surface, she could still feel the echoes of the darkness that had threatened to consume her, a constant reminder of the horrors she had faced. And yet, despite the lingering sense of unease, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of peace settle over her like a warm blanket. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she was free from the fear that had haunted her every waking moment, free from the darkness that had threatened to swallow her whole. As she sat in the silence, Sarah reflected on the harrowing ordeal she had endured and the lessons she had learned about the true nature of evil. She had been forced to confront her deepest fears, to confront the darkness that lurked within her own soul, and in doing so, she had emerged stronger than she ever thought possible. But perhaps the greatest lesson of all was the power of hope, the belief that even in the darkest of times, there was always a glimmer of light waiting to guide her home. For it was hope that had sustained her through the darkest moments of her ordeal, hope that had given her the strength to carry on when all seemed lost. And as she rose to her feet, her heart lighter than it had been in years, Sarah knew that she would carry that hope with her wherever she went. For though the darkness may have been banished from her home, she knew that it would always linger on the edges of her consciousness, a constant reminder of the fragility of life and the enduring power of the human spirit. Chapter 12. Epilogue Echoes of Evil. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the quiet suburban street as Sarah stood outside her newly restored home. Despite the victory she had achieved, a sense of unease still lingered in the air, whispering of the darkness that had once haunted these walls. As she gazed up at the house, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her, waiting in the shadows for the perfect moment to strike again. Despite her best efforts to banish the malevolent presence that had once plagued her home, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that it still lingered, biding its time until it could unleash its horrors once more. With a heavy heart, Sarah stepped inside, the familiar creak of the floorboards beneath her feet, sending a shiver down her body. The house was silent now, the chaos of battle replaced by an eerie stillness that seemed to seep into her very bones. As she wandered through the empty rooms, Memories of the horrors she had faced flooded back with a vengeance, each one a painful reminder of the darkness that had once threatened to consume her. And yet, despite the lingering sense of fear, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of defiance welling up inside her. For though the darkness may still linger, she refused to let it control her, refused to let it dictate the course of her life. With each step she took, Sarah felt a newfound sense of strength and determination coursing through her veins, a resolve to face whatever horrors the future may hold with courage and resilience. But as she reached the top of the stairs and turned to look back at the house one last time, a sense of foreboding washed over her like a tidal wave. For in the darkness that loomed before her, she could sense the presence of something sinister, something ancient and powerful that lurked just beyond her reach. With a heavy heart, Sarah closed the door behind her, sealing herself off from the outside world and the horrors that awaited her within. And as the darkness closed in around her, she couldn't shake the feeling that the true battle had only just begun, and that the echoes of evil would continue to haunt her for the rest of her days.